Hi, I'm Ben White, Director of the UMF Fitness and Recreation Center and Chair of the Wellbeing Committee. I'm here to talk to you today about the science of happiness, what the research tells us does and doesn't make us happy. Almost the entirety of this talk is taken from a podcast, The Happiness Lab, presented by Dr. Laurie Santos, a psychology professor at Yale. If you like what you hear today, I highly recommend that you check out her podcast. As we start talking about happiness, it's important to understand what we're talking about. What is happiness? Researchers think of happiness in two ways. First, the frequency of positive emotions, joy, love, excitement. And second, having meaning. The direction that we have with our life, the control we have over it. You can think of it as being happy in your life on a day-to-day basis and being happy with your life, with that control. I'd like to start out with a little mental exercise. Which do you think in 5 years' time would make you happier? Winning $10 million in the lottery or having an accident that left you confined to a wheelchair for the rest of your life? It may surprise you to learn that in 5 years' time, these two events will leave you feeling just as happy as you are right now. You'll certainly experience some pretty different highs and lows throughout that time period. But ultimately, neither event is going to have a significant impact on your current level of happiness. And to me, the big question is why? Why is one event that is so much more objectively better than the other not inclined to make us happier? The answer lies in what researchers have discovered makes us happy. The first part is our DNA, our genes. Researchers tell us that this accounts for about 50% of our happiness levels. Not much we can do about that, and hopefully we were all dealt a good hand in that regard. The next component that comprises our happiness is our environment, our social network, our jobs, our living environment. That only comprises about 10% of our happiness, with a very important caveat. It assumes that we live in what's called normal circumstances. We're not in fear for our safety or food scarcity. So assuming those things, our environment makes up about 10%. The final 40% is made up by our outlook, how we view the world. This is where, unfortunately, so many of us struggle, but fortunately, this is where we have the greatest measure of control. Let's do another thought experiment. I want you to think of some of your favorite activities. Going for a hike or a run, going to the movies or out to eat, whatever it might be. And I'd like you to think about whether you enjoy those activities more by yourself or with friends. There may be some things, reading, that we enjoy more independently, but by and large, people tend to enjoy activities more when they do them with other people. That's the next piece that we're going to focus on, is social behavior. Humans are social beings. We do better when we are with others. There's a great experiment done by the University of Chicago, I believe, where they had participants talk to strangers while on the train for their morning commute. Participants were divided into three groups. Group one did not talk to anybody. Group two was instructed to do whatever they normally do on their morning commute, which generally meant not talking to anybody. And group three was instructed to initiate a conversation with a stranger on the train. I expect many of you watching are thinking, my gosh, if I was in this, please don't put me in group three. And by and large, that's what the participants were rooting for as well. They were asked prior to the experiments what they thought their experiences would be like having to initiate this conversation. And pretty much all of them said that they would have a negative experience. Despite this, however, all the participants in group three experienced a very pleasant conversation with a stranger. And I expect some of you might be thinking that, well, that makes sense for the extroverts. They love talking to people. But an introvert wouldn't enjoy that at all. The researchers measured that as well. And as it turns out, the introverts enjoyed the conversations just as much as the extroverts. They just expected to like it less. You might also be thinking, well, what about those strangers? Who wants to be pestered on their morning commute? The researchers measured that as well. The strangers who had the conversation initiated with them reported having a more enjoyable commute than they would otherwise have done. So talk to strangers. You'll both enjoy it. There's another great experiment, this time having to do with chocolate, which may be easier for some of you to get behind. In this experiment, there were two groups. Some participants tasted chocolate and moved around to do other variety of activities independently of each other. And in the second condition, participants tasted the chocolate and moved as a group with other people. So in one condition, you're tasting the chocolate just by yourself, and the other condition, you're tasting it with other people. And in the second condition, where the participants tasted the chocolate in that group, they reported, despite the fact that it was the exact same chocolate in both conditions, those who tasted the chocolate along with other participants reported the chocolate tasted better. This helps explain that phenomenon that some of you may have picked up on when you're doing something with someone who's not fully engaged. I think of watching a TV show with my wife. Perhaps you had this experience, you're watching a show and your person you're with is scrolling their phone. And despite the fact that you're engaged in a passive activity of just watching something, you notice that you're enjoying it less simply because the other person isn't paying attention to the same thing that you are. This is a common psychological phenomenon. When we share those experiences, they become more powerful. And speaking of those phones, it's really hard to address social behavior without bringing up the negative social comparisons that often result from the use of our phones on social media. Let's start our third interactive exercise here. I want you to think, who has more friends, you or other people? Who's more outgoing, you or other people? If you're like most respondents to these questions, you probably thought that other people have more friends and are more outgoing. But chances are you're not giving yourself enough credit here. Research tells us that when we're asked to make these types of comparisons, we tend to think of our most outgoing, most social friends and compare ourselves against them, forgetting all the other people for whom we're a little more closely related. This experiment was captured incredibly well. In a study done on Olympic athletes. Some of you may recognize this picture. This is Olympic gymnast McKayla Maroney, who had the misfortune of having her Maroney face broadcast live to the entire world. McKayla suffered from what researchers have come to understand is a pretty common phenomenon of social comparison. For those of you who don't recall, McKayla Maroney was a favorite for gold in a particular gymnastics event, only to finish in the silver medal position. But in one great study, researchers have looked at the facial expressions of Olympic athletes in every sport across an entire games. Psychologists have the ability to catalog facial expressions and determine the true emotions that are being expressed there. So they were able to really understand what the medalists were thinking. Unsurprisingly, they were able to determine that the gold medalists were the happiest of the three different medalists, which is, again, no big surprise. They just achieved their life's ambition, been recognized as the best in their discipline in the world, at least on that given day, and were justifiably incredibly happy. What might be a little more surprising, though, is that the silver medalists were the least happy of the three, and social comparison is the culprit. While the bronze medalists were looking down at all the other participants who didn't achieve a medal at all, the silver medalists were looking up and bemoaning the lost victory. When we compare ourselves only to that gold standard, we're left with very little room to feel good about ourselves and our accomplishments. We need to remember that there's a lot more out there than just the gold standard in order to help be happier with what we have in our own lives. These negative social comparisons are exacerbated by social media. When we scroll through our Facebook or Instagram feeds, we're looking at the curated lives of our family and friends, which oftentimes are not very close to their actual lives. People tend to post only the highs on social media, giving us only the opportunity to compare ourselves against that gold standard. But what often is the case is that people are only showing us the good things. Perhaps you know somebody who looked to have an ideal life on social media, but then you found out about some unfortunate aspect, the end of a relationship, something else troubling in their life. We certainly shouldn't be rooting for bad things to happen to other people so that we can feel good about our own life. But it's important to remember that when we're comparing ourselves to others, which is an inherent aspect of social media, we're typically making a comparison against that gold standard, which is not healthy for our psyche. We need to remember that what we're seeing is that curated life. And that's not the thing that we should be comparing ourselves against. One of the best ways to maintain perspective about our actual life is to practice gratitude. If there is one thing that I'm hoping you'll take away from this talk, it's the message of gratitude, which ends up being probably the biggest correlate to people's happiness. There's a great study from the University of California at Davis where participants wrote in journals a few times a week. Group 1 wrote about things for which they were grateful. Group 2 wrote about daily irritations. Group 3 wrote about life experiences with no particular emphasis on positive or negative. After 10 weeks, Group 1, the group that wrote about things for which they were grateful, felt more optimistic, better about their lives, exercised more, and had fewer visits to the doctor. And this isn't all. University of Pennsylvania asked participants, who again were college students, so like the previous study, to deliver a letter of gratitude to a person that they'd never properly thanked before. Their happiness scores went up dramatically, and the effects of that lasted a month. Finally, students at the University of California at Berkeley were asked to write in an online gratitude journal for 1 to 2 weeks. They reported better physical health, fewer headaches, less stomach pain, clearer skin, less muscle soreness, less nausea, and reduced congestion, all as a result of practicing routine gratitude. It is an incredibly powerful tool for our perspective and our outlook on the world. Similarly is optimism, and there are an incredible number of studies about the benefit of optimism. I'm not going to summarize them here, but I will tell you that the results of optimism are better coping skills, that optimism insulates us against stress, and that we have improved physical health for those who practice optimism. Paired together, gratitude and optimism are really some of our best tools in cultivating that happy life that we're looking for. Now, even the most grateful, optimistic people are going to have bad things happen to them from time to time. So it's important that we have tools to be able to deal with those things when we do. The first tool I want to share with you is something called mindfulness. Mindfulness is being aware of yourself, your body, your emotions, things like that. What mindfulness does, it allows us to accept our feelings, understand them, internalize them, but then helpfully move beyond them. There's a great anecdote about the Dalai Lama who says that even he feels anger at times, but his practice of mindfulness allows him to feel that anger and then move beyond it. The next thing is another great tool called mental forecasting. There was this movement in the 50s and 60s called The Power of Positive Thinking. I had a book of the same title. More recently, there was a book called The Secret. And in both of those books, the message was essentially the same, that when you think good thoughts, good things will happen to you. Unfortunately, the research doesn't support this. What it does support is the near opposite. Not thinking about negative thoughts exactly, but thinking about bad things that might happen, and importantly, the way that we'll overcome them. This is a common strategy for military, for sports teams, When we prepare for bad things and develop a strategy to deal with them, we end up feeling better about having a plan in general. And even if that plan doesn't go well, we've had that plan. But hopefully, if we've done a good job in our forecasting, we have, in fact, a successful plan to deal with those negative things. So yes, we want to be optimistic, but we also want to mentally prepare for negative things that might happen. And mental forecasting is a phenomenal tool to help us get ready for the bad things in life that invariably happen to us. Now, there are some things in life, and hopefully those of you listening and watching haven't and won't experience them, but there are some things in life that mental forecasting alone can't prepare us for. Some truly significantly bad things. There was a study done on Holocaust survivors that looked at different ways of dealing with the horrors of that atrocity. Many people, and this was the case for many of the Holocaust survivors as well, their instinct is to kind of bury those negative feelings deep within themselves, not to talk about them, and just try to move on. And we actually expend an incredible amount of mental and emotional energy suppressing things like that. What ends up to be more beneficial, however, is talking. A study found that Holocaust survivors that talked about their past, and this could be talking with a friend, talking with a therapist, some of them actually gave talks to audiences about their experiences. Talking about negative experiences helps us process them and then move beyond them so that we can expend less mental energy suppressing and dealing with it internally. Those who talk about their past end up, again, having better health markers and being significantly happier overall. Some of the negative events that occur in day-to-day life are far less impactful than something like the Holocaust, and that is how we interact with time. All too often, people report not having enough time. In fact, there's a concept called time famine, when we're literally starved for time. That's pretty prevalent in today's life. We often find ourselves rushing through the day thinking that there isn't enough time to get everything done that we need to get done. But that isn't often the case, at least in terms of what it takes to improve our overall happiness levels. A 5-minute reflection or a gratitude letter can take only a couple minutes. And physical activity, at least the amount in order required to be able to improve our happiness levels, can only take 20 minutes. So you can fit in something like a gratitude reflection in your drive to work or walk to class. If you don't think you can fit in a 20-minute exercise during the course of your day, let your boss know that employees who engage in physical activity during work are more productive during the remainder of their day than those who didn't. So hopefully you can fit in some time at work to get that physical activity. The other aspect of time is how we mentally engage with the time that we have. All too often, we're engaged in one thing, but our mind is really somewhere else. One of the things that research tells us that we should be striving for is to be present in the moment that we're in. Not thinking about the list of tasks or the errands that we have to do later or some stressful future event. But living in the moment really has a significant impact on our overall happiness scores. There was a great study done on parents who, at the end of their workday, were given some negative feedback from their boss and then needed to go pick up their children. And researchers put them into one of two conditions. Either you were going to ignore that negative event with your boss and just do your best to enjoy your time with your kids in the experiment, or you were going to talk to your kids about the experience with your boss and how you were feeling. And perhaps based on the information of the Holocaust survivors, it won't surprise you to know that the parents who talked to their kids were far happier in that experiment. They were able to move beyond that mental anguish of that negative experience and then be fully present with their children. And this didn't have an impact only on the parents, but the children were also happier as well. You might think that they would not have been interested to hear about this negative experience and just want to play, but the fact that the parents, one, shared something with them, and then two, were able to mentally move beyond that negative experience and be more present with their kids, left the kids having a more positive experience as well. There's another great study that looked at taking pictures and how taking pictures of an event not only improves our recollection of the event, but also our retroactive enjoyment of it as well, which makes sense. We all like to look back at an enjoyable experience we have and reminisce and relive that time mentally through our pictures. The study also looked at the impact of social media. And while social media certainly has that negative social comparison we talked about earlier, it does have the benefit of when people post pictures and things on social media, they tend to have an increase in happiness as a result of that. Think about you've posted something from travel or an accomplishment you were particularly happy about, and you got a flood of positive feedback from your support system. Those things make us happy as well. The really interesting finding of this study, however, was that when you take pictures for the express purpose of posting them on social media, our happiness scores go down. And this is because it takes us out of the moment. We're no longer trying to capture a moment for the sake of having that moment. When we're trying to capture a moment, thinking about the impact that that moment's going to have on the responses of our social network, it removes us from that moment and we are not as happy about it. So take your pictures, but decide later if you want to post them to social media. Take them for them, for you to be able to relive that moment. And don't worry in the moment about how your social network is going to react. It'll likely be positive, but figure that part out later. Next, I want to talk to you about the benefits of physical activity as they relate to happiness. Now, most of us know that physical activity helps with things like anxiety and depression. So I'm not going to cover that element of it. What I want to talk about is how the pro-social behavior, like optimism and gratitude, also affects physical activity. There was a study that looked at what's called eulogy virtues, things like kindness, and compared them to what are called the resume virtues: diligence, grit. The eulogy virtues are the things that you want people to say about you at your funeral, and the resume virtues are the things that you espouse to a potential employer when you're talking about a job. And it looked at how those compared to our ability to put our future selves first. And what researchers find is that people who focus on the eulogy virtues, things like kindness and gratitude, have a better ability to put the interest of their future self first. And what that does is allows us to plan better for the future, to do things like save more money. But it also allows us to put our long-term health first. So by maintaining that mentality of the eulogy virtues, people tend to exercise more, knowing that their long-term health is a benefit. Researchers also looked at people who exercise at least every other day, and realized that when people exercise, they are more receptive to positive events that happen in the world. Not just that they happen more, but they're more able to recognize them. So by working out consistently, you'll able, if you were to do it every other day, you'll be able to carry that positive effect of various happenings in your life throughout the rest of your life. So there's an inherent physical benefit to exercising as well, but also by practicing these virtues, you're going to be more likely to work out. Research tells us that it is our pro-social behavior like kindness, gratitude, and optimism that allows us far more than willpower, which is where so many people get caught up with exercising, thinking that they just need to be tougher, mentally tougher, which is a good skill, but research shows us that pro-social behaviors are actually going to have a more significant impact on the likelihood of us sticking with a workout or fitness program. Okay, takeaways. What do I hope you've learned from this talk? It's not our possessions or circumstances that make us happy. It is our outlook. Our brains lie to us, tricking us into making choices that don't improve our happiness. We think checking Facebook and scrolling through is going to make us happy. Oftentimes it ends us leading us to make those negative social comparisons. We've got to stick with what the research tells us is going to make us happy, not what our intuition tells us, because our intuition is often wrong. Happiness is like a leaky tire. You've got to keep pumping it up. You can't just, be grateful once and that carries you for the rest of your life. Now, with gratitude, actually, some of those things can carry you quite some time, but you've got to routinely engage in the types of behaviors that make us happy in order to maintain happiness levels. So let's talk about some action items. What am I hoping that you're going to do as a result of seeing this talk? Be social, even when you think you won't enjoy it. Think about those passengers on the train. Everyone that I discussed this study with is blown away that even the introverts enjoy that experience, especially when they think that they won't. Get out there and be social. If you're watching this still in COVID times, be social safely. Create time for yourself and be present in the time that you have. Remember that study with the parents and kids. Even the kids enjoyed the interactions more. So will your family, other family and friends. When you're present in the moment with someone, not only are you enjoying it more, but they're enjoying it more as well. And create that time. It doesn't take as much time as we think to impact our happiness. 5-minute reflection, 20-minute workout during the day. Be aware of your feelings and don't suppress them. All right, mindfulness, the Dalai Lama anecdote, the story with the Holocaust survivors, talking about our experiences. Suppressing them takes up cognitive and emotional energy, which leaves us feeling tired and worn. Be active and get enough rest. I didn't talk much about sleep here. Sleep has a massive impact on our emotions in general, as does activity. Practice gratitude. Like I said, if there's one thing that I'm hoping you'll take away from this talk, it is gratitude. It is, along with optimism, the biggest correlate to happiness. Avoid negative comparisons. Remember that it is the curated life that you're seeing when you look at your friends and family on those social networks. And remember the Olympic athletes. The silver medalists weren't as happy as they could have been because they couldn't avoid that negative comparison. Try not to fall into that same trap. Be grateful for where you've ended up. Be optimistic. Covered that one at length already. And this one I haven't. Practice temptation bundling. Temptation bundling is when you take a behavior that you know you should do less of and pair it with a behavior that you know you should do more of, but maybe don't enjoy so much. Think about exercising and watching TV. Yeah, it's great to just flop down on the couch and watch a few hours of TV. Of course, who has time for that? But if you can take that and pair it with physical activity, ride the exercise bike while watching a show, for example, and you only do those things together, you're going to do the less beneficial behavior less frequently, and you're going to do the more beneficial behavior more frequently. That's called temptation bundling when you put those things together. So practicing those allows us to kind of feel better about both of those things. All right. I hope you can get out there and practice some of these things, and I hope you have enjoyed the talk. Get out there, be well, and be happy. Take care, everyone.